the Reconstructionist Radio Podcast Network presents Worldview Media Podcast, where Gordon and Joyce Runyon view popular media through the lens of the biblical five-point covenant model to help believers appreciate and apply principles of exciting narrative and engaging storytelling.
Hello again. Welcome to the Worldview Media Podcast. Very good. So I'm here with my lovely and talented wife, Joyce.
Hello. Hello.
And
we're mixing it up.
Yeah, we're doing it a little bit different. I'm just here with Joyce and a bottle of extremely cheap Canadian whiskey. Not a whole bottle.
I don't know, you're talking
I've
kind
already
of crazy.
drank part of it. No, one glass mixed with a lot of soda to cover the taste.
I see. But we
cheap
digress.
Canadian whiskey. Yep. Okay. We've got a different kind of podcast we're going to do today.
We can give it a try.
We're going to talk about two different books or book franchises in your case. Now, before we start, though, we need to make clear that, Joyce, you are basically a nerd.
What? Where did this come from?
Well, it's just...
Life?
It's just true. You love all things Star Trek, right?
Most things Star Trek.
Oh, what things Star Trek do you not love?
There are some bad things Star Trek.
Every Star Trek fan admits that there's some bad Star Trek. You love the Firefly series.
That was quality.
You're generally a fan of science fiction, right?
Usually.
Yeah. You're not big on Star Wars, though, are you?
I can take it or leave it.
Okay. But you're a big superhero fan as well?
Well,
of the
who
movies.
in their right mind would not be?
And you're smart enough to be a Marvel and not so much a DC fan.
But I can still watch DC. It's probably not my favorite. I think it's probably a little bit more dark than what I usually prefer.
Yeah, right. Well, I guess that's not really fair because you like watching Gotham and Arrow and Flash.
Yeah. But, those are all television.
Yeah, right.
So it's not quite the same.
Gotham's pretty dark, though.
Yeah, but you like that one more than I
God, I like Gotham.
I watch that to appease you.
Oh. Well, marriage is all about concessions.
Yes.
Meeting in the middle. Okay. But I am a bigger Marvel fan, probably.
You're probably more knowledgeable with backstories. So then, who, my dear, is... is what?
A nerd? Oh, you're going to bring up the fact that I used to play Dungeons and Dragons.
Well, I wasn't going to go there, but here we are.
And Champions, the superhero role-playing game. Yeah, I've
dabbled in all that.
Wasted a lifetime on those things. Okay, so we get that established that you're basically a nerd. But you really enjoy reading fiction books quite a bit, right?
Yeah,
and
I do. I read a good amount of fiction.
You somehow find your way to these fantasy series. You read quite a few different series.
I try to keep current with what's coming out, some of the new things that are being released.
Okay.
And I really tend to stay in youth fiction.
You like youth fiction?
Yes. And that's a purposeful choice for me because it tends to not have language issues.
And sex issues.
It tends to not have
right.
sexual issues. It tends not to have a lot of the things that you'll find in adult.
Oh, right.
Adult. And, quotation marks, sometimes it's just too adult. So it tends to be free of a lot of the extraneous crud that can go on
right.
in lots of...
Can you think offhand of some of the names of these other series that you liked? There was something about broken glass, or what was that?
No, I was doing it was an angel series, and it's been a while since I've read them, but it was a popular one. They started doing, they did do a movie on it. They did
There's
a
like
television
a TV
series, yeah. And I don't know if that's been renewed or not, but I saw a couple of those episodes, and it was kind of me. And I thought, I'll just read the book because the book is always better. And it was about angels
coming to fight demons,
or people with angel blood in them. And you all may know this series and say, "Oh yeah, it's this one," and it's just not on my.
And was there also something like a City of Ashes? Is that the same thing?
Yeah, City of Ashes, City of Bone, City of Glass. There's several in that, and there's a character Bane in there, and that one, maybe went a little far on some of the other things.
Okay, but we're here to talk about
The
different
latest
series.
The latest one
that you've been reading.
Is Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children, and there is a movie coming out about that, I believe, in November.
Okay, so pretty soon.
Yes, pretty soon.
All right, and I know this is popular too. I kind of see it because of the job I have, and I see it around and see, obviously, people are talking about it. So, Miss Peregrine's Home for Unusual Children. So, give us an overview of what's going on there.
Well, the book starts off looking really boring and kind of plain and
that's
slow.
Horrible, really?
It does, but it's because of the character in there. It's about this young kid and how, he doesn't really have any friends. His family has money, but he doesn't really fit in anywhere, and he just sees his life being this long thing to endure, having to work for the family business, having to do all of these things that are expected of him.
When you say he's young, he's like teenager, right?
Yeah.
16.
Yeah, he's a teen.
Okay.
So he's kind of got one friend that's really more for protection than a real friendship. I think they're probably different intellectually. And the one odd thing about him is his grandfather, who has always told him these stories, these fantastical stories of people who could do amazing things and his travels. And, he fell for it hook, line, and sinker as a kid. And, he lived to hear his grandpa tell him these stories. And, of course, as he got older, he just said, well, there's no way this can be true. Someone's been feeding me a load all my life. And, just realizes that his future is, even though he's really well set off, he seems a kind of bleak and in a dismal future ahead of him. Until.
Okay, so something tragic happens.
Yeah.
His grandfather dies.
He's there when that happens, and he sees some things that kind of freak him out. He's like, what is this that I'm seeing? This can't be real.
He sees stuff that nobody else can see, is that right?
He sees stuff that, monsters. He sees monsters.
And a monster kills his grandfather, is that what happens?
That's what we are led to believe. Something very terrible happened to his grandfather, and he's there when he dies, and like I say, he looks up and he sees these monsters, and his grandfather tells him some kind of weird things,
cryptic last message.
Go look here for this and that, and he's just like, okay, my grandpa's delirious, I'm insane, and my world, which I thought was bad, has suddenly gotten worse.
Okay. Now that sets him off on a kind of a detective mission to find out what was going on.
And I think as they go through, clearing out the home where his grandfather lived, they come across some things. And one thing that's kind of unusual about the book is that the gentleman who wrote them uses old pictures that are kind of odd looking. It looks like children are floating, or, it's a dog dressed up like a person with a pipe, or, there's all sorts of odd pictures that he's included in his book that are apparently real photographs that he's gotten a hold of and he's included. Right. And the stories kind of have to do with those pictures too, and this is who this person is, and so he runs across the little box with all these pictures in there, and he's going to see a psychiatrist who's trying to help him. And
well, let me ask you this: you mentioned that he includes pictures in the within the pages of the novel. Would the novel be as good without the pictures, or do the pictures do something in terms of setting a scene or just kind of adding a creepy feel? Would it be the same without those pictures, or what?
I think the pictures add a component because, of course, when you describe something in words, sometimes you don't quite hit the right mark with it. And so a lot of the things he describes, you turn the page and, well, here's the picture of that. And so it just kind of clarifies it in your mind and solidifies it a little bit more.
Yeah, I think I did. You and Reagan were reading the first book at the same time, right?
Yes.
And I flipped through one of your copies and saw those pictures. And I could see the kind of ambiance that I think they were trying to create with those. But what I'm wondering is that a neat thing added on, or is it a shortcut? You know, instead of having to be really good at describing and setting a scene, can they just put a creepy picture in there and suddenly you've got
I think
it? Or
it kind of served a twofold purpose in that you could see what he was talking about, and then to kind of maybe establish a little bit more that this is a real thing because they are real pictures.
yeah,
And so this is a society of sorts of people with very unusual abilities and talents that have kind of hidden themselves in our community, and because of different things have kind of become extinct in some sense.
So if you were to go to the orphanage where they all were, you wouldn't find them. It would look, it's in ruins and abandoned. Or
Well, the thing with the books is that all of these children are hidden within loops, and they're time loops.
time loops. So you're not just going to run into them.
No, you have to find the right entrance into the loop, and supposedly only people with peculiar blood in them can get through. So it's kind of some safeguard features built in to that.
Okay, well then a question comes to my mind. Is this set in modern day?
The beginning is.
Oh, right, because they got the whole time thing
Yes,
going on.
because they got the time loop.
The pictures are very old.
Yes.
Okay, so probably from a lot from the 19th century, some of those pictures.
I would think so.
Okay, so the question that I have in my mind then is, can you pinpoint where the source of these peculiarities come from in these kids? Is it an evolutionary thing, or?
It seems to me as probably a little bit more random, because the grandfather had this ability, the children, his mom and dad didn't, but yet he does. And so it just seems it kind of shows up here and there. And I think in in the second book where I was reading, these kids just turned out with these abilities, and their parents were like, I don't know what to do with you.
Well, is the speculation that these are like recessive genetic traits that
I would think
pop up or something?
It kind of reminds me of Xavier's school in a
Right,
sense.
I was just going to ask, is it the same kind of concept as like X-Men or something?
It's similar, but I think their abilities are a little bit more.
They're weird.
Yeah.
Yeah. One guy carries bees in his stomach, or
Yeah.
And,
One girl's extremely strong.
And one girl's got like a mouth with fangs on the back of her head, or
she has
something.
2 mouths. There's another one that can float, and I think that's on the picture of one of the books where you see a girl that's kind of levitating, so she has to wear the really heavy shoes. And if you've seen the trailers on TV, it's
Okay, so now there are monsters that are the bad guys, right? That are trying to kill the peculiar children.
They are after the loop keepers, and those are special ladies that can turn into birds.
Okay, and Miss Peregrine is one of them.
Yes, and most of those women have bird names.
Okay,
You'll find that out.
What are the stakes that are involved here? I mean, they get hold of these time loop things, then what? Can they rule the world, or what's going on there?
Well, apparently there was a break between the people in the time loops, the keepers of that. Some people said we just need to overrun the world and take it over and get rid of humans and just have us here, because obviously we're better people. Again, kind of similar to X-Men.
The Brotherhood of Evil Mutants.
Yeah. And so I saw a lot of similarities in that, just because.
Is Miss Peregrine kind of a Professor X
kind of
character?
Yeah, I mean, she goes out and she finds these kids and brings them back to her time loop.
So would it be fair to say it's
A knockoff?
kind of does it? Well, would you say that it's a knockoff kind of thing, or
There's enough differences that I think it's valid on its own.
Okay,
but there
well,
are some similarities.
what's your prediction about the movie? Do you think that people are gonna see it as a just kind of a spin-off of a superhero sort of thing, or what?
I don't think so, because the time setting is different, and you've got some time issues in there as well. And most of our superheroes, of course, they're all like current day type of things, and these aren't set in that kind of situation.
Well, remember that old horrible movie from a few years back, that the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen?
Yeah.
Is it kind of in that class, you think? Steampunk era sort of stuff, or not? No?
No,
Okay.
I don't think so.
All right. Well, if you had to, I'm putting you on the spot here, but if X-Men is very evolutionary in its thinking, and evolution is the thing, and as far as when we start talking about sovereignty and law giving and law keeping, the X-Men kind of dissolves into whoever is powerful enough gets to make the rules.
Yeah.
Do you see that in that series, or is there some different?
I do, but I don't see it from the good side. I see it from the people that are trying to go in and alter things and change stuff.
What do the good guys want to see happen?
Well, they
instead?
just, they want to be left alone in their time loops.
Okay, so just being left alone is kind of the ideal.
Mm-hmm. And I think for them, they're there because they didn't fit in. They're supposedly more like the sideshow people in the carnival from a long time back when that was very popular, and anybody unusual could have a job like that.
Right. Okay. And how would you rate it, just in terms of writing ability and stuff like that? Is it well written, or?
Yeah, and it's easy to read. It's not overly challenging.
What would you say the overall message is to the young adults that are reading that series?
People with differences aren't necessarily bad, maybe.
Okay.
But you still have to kind of, because of the time loops and the traveling, they wind up going back to when it's World War II.
Yeah.
And the Nazis. And the Nazis aren't just the Nazis, they're actually
monsters.
Yeah. And so some of the correlations in with that, I think, is interesting, that they're not just Nazis, they're monsters.
Oh, okay. Well, interesting. That's not a bad theme. That theme all by itself is not bad, because in the Bible we see Jesus kind of reaching out to the outcasts and the misfits and the people who are not powerful, but in our day that theme is often used to justify aberrant behavior. It's not just different, but it's aberrant, which means to be abhorred.
Well, but we can't say anything's wrong anymore.
Right. That would be judgmental.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is just wrong.
Okay, so give it a letter grade, the series so far as you've read it. You read the first 2 books. What do you feel like?
I'd probably give it a high B.
Okay.
Yeah. And when I finished the first book, I thought, oh, this would make a pretty good series. And then
there's more.
And then Reagan said, well, it is. And I said, well, it makes perfect sense.
All right. Well, very good. Let's take a break, and then we'll come back, and it'll be my turn to talk about a book that I was affected by. We'll be right back.
The Reconstructionist Radio Podcast Network brings to you a complete lineup of podcasts where you will hear practical and tactical theology. Our desire is not simply that you consume our shows, but that you also live out your faith in every area of life. We can talk all day long about these things, but if we fail to put them into practice, then we fail as ambassadors of Jesus Christ, our King. Subscribe now to your favorite Reconstructionist Radio Podcast Network shows, or you can subscribe to the Reconstructionist Radio Master Feed, where all of the content we produce, including the audiobooks and audio articles, will pop up as soon as they are available. And don't forget to visit reconstructionistradio.com to volunteer as a narrator or to partner with this ministry financially. May the Holy Spirit stir you into action for Christ and His kingdom.
And we're back. My bottle of whiskey is, my glass of whiskey. Partially drained. So here we are, and you were thinking you remembered the name of the book series where the angels come to fight the demons?
It might be City of Angels.
City of Angels.
Yeah,
Okay, maybe.
I should have checked. Sorry.
No, I didn't even tell you I was going to ask you about that. All right. So now it's my turn to talk about a book that affected me a lot. I wasn't raised really as a Christian. I was saved when I was in my early 20s and spent most of my childhood believing that I wanted to become a novelist when I grew up. That's what I wanted to do for my full-time job.
You actually wrote a novel as a teenager, didn't you?
Let's not speak of that novel. No, I actually did. Between my 9th and 10th grade year in high school, I sat at an electric typewriter and typed out a novel that was about 300 pages, close to that.
Kind of substantial for the age.
Oh, right.
Any age.
Not bad for a 14-year-old. Yeah. Of course, it's worthless and horrible and all that. But anyway, that's what I honestly believed I wanted to do. And if you had asked me what book I loved the most, it would have probably been Stephen King's Salem's Lot, but and I had a love-hate relationship with that. We talk about that in an upcoming podcast, I believe. But the other book that I would have listed, I tried to find it on Amazon. It's out of print now, but if you can get a hold of it, if you are a prospective writer, you want to write novels, you want to write good stories, I'd highly recommend you try to get a hold of this book. It's by an author named Dean Koontz, Koontz. And he wrote a book called How to Write Best-Selling Fiction. And I practically slept with that book under my pillow for a long time. I don't know. I couldn't even tell you how many times I reread that book over and over and trying to soak everything in.
So lots of good information in there?
Yeah, maybe the value in it was how it inspired me. You know, I did a lot of writing as a result of reading that book. And some of our listeners may not know, but in 1999, I had a novel published by a little publishing house owned by a good Presbyterian man, and the book is titled Prowl, and it's out of print actually right now. If you're interested in this book, you can get a hold of me on Facebook.
It is a good book.
Oh, you're married to me. You have to say that.
No, because when we first read the ending, we didn't like it.
Oh, yeah.
And we said that as well.
Your criticisms were honest. Yeah, that's true. So I had this book published in 2000. Well, about 1999, 2000. I forget the actual year. But this book is a military action adventure that kind of capitalizes on my experience in the United States Navy submarine fleet. And it's got Christian content and well, I don't know about romance.
A little.
Long distance romance.
Well, that is life sometimes.
right. And definitely Christian content. And I wrote the book as a self-conscious Christian reconstructionist. And I'm not sure there are many novels like that. And so that kind of makes it unique. And then a few years ago, published another novel. It's like you were just talking about, it's a young adult fantasy action adventure. And it's called The Groaning Man, and you can find that on Amazon.com. And what I tried to do with this is kind of mesh two genres. I would say The Groaning Man is probably 70-30 mix between like a Western and like a Dungeons and Dragons type of fantasy setting. So it was meant to be book one in a trilogy called Dungeons and Cowboys. And so the second book is not going to come out anytime soon, but I
is waiting.
I do have the outline in my mind. But anyway, the only reason I mentioned that, I don't mean that to be commercials or anything, just that this book by Dean Koontz really did influence me, and it really did inspire me. And I just wanted to talk about some things in it that I thought were helpful, that hopefully would help aspiring writers who might happen to listen to the podcast. Because we do talk about how to tell stories.
Yeah. Well, and that really is an art.
Sure. It's an art form.
And if you've had to listen to people tell stories,
right.
You know the ones who can do it well and the ones who get information across. So
yeah, right. And I have a theory that part of being created in the image of God is a love of stories and the ability to tell good stories. I think it's pretty obvious to me that God loves stories. You know, he packed so many stories into the Bible. He could have just given us a list of commandments and doctrines, but most of the Bible is stories, you know.
And it's details. You know, it's not just vague.
Gory details sometimes,
but
which we will talk about in an upcoming podcast. Okay, so I just wanted to mention a couple of high points and things that have stuck with me and things that I tried to implement in my own writing. And as he was talking about plot, Dean Koontz made a point that I think is even more applicable now than it was when I was reading this book back in the early 80s. And that point was, you really, really, really have to grab the reader as fast as you can.
Yeah.
Now, as you were just talking about this Miss Peregrine book, you said something that shocked me, that it starts out slow. And to me, I just consider that to be like the death knell for a book that you're actually hoping people will enjoy and read. So that's kind of surprising to me.
Well, it was just all very ordinary. You know, there was nothing that made you think, you know.
And there's no sense of danger or
not
anything.
Immediately, I'd say. No, not really.
Yeah, see, I think Dean Koontz would say, no, you can't do that. Or that's not wise. His theory was that if you see people going into a bookstore and they're going down the aisles like at Barnes and Noble or something, and they're picking paperbacks off the shelf, he said there are so many of these things that you're competing with that it all has to be perfect when they pick that book up. That artwork has to be great. And you're a novelist, you're writing a story, but that's just the economics of the situation. I know for people who want to be purists and artistes and stuff like that, you wish that wasn't the case. But the outside of the book really does, people know they're not supposed to judge a book by the cover, but they do all the time.
Yeah.
I'll admit I've gone to bookstores and was just looking for something to read, and I picked a book that I didn't know the author, and I'd never heard anything about the book, but the artwork was really cool, and I liked the summary on the back cover.
Yeah.
And that's why I bought it.
But did you like the book?
No, it was not very good.
Judging a book by the cover.
I still do remember it, though.
Yeah.
But so his point was that you really don't have much of a shot with the book buyer. As hard as it is to get a book published, and then as hard as it is to get your published book on actual bookstore shelves, it's even harder to get anybody to buy it.
Well, especially today with all of the electronic
there's so
media
much competition.
Yeah.
And so his point was, there's no sense whining about it or complaining about it, but the truth is that you just don't have any time
to waste.
Yeah, to sit around thinking, well, I'll hook the reader later. And so his actual advice was, if the reader's being very generous with you, maybe they'll read the first page of your book and see. And he said, you have to hook them in that first page. If you're being smart, you better hook them in that first page.
Well, just as an example, I think most people that have read your book, Prowl, say, I got it after the first page and I just had to keep going.
Right.
And keep going and keep going and keep going. So, I think you took that lesson to heart.
Right. Well, and I did in The Groaning Man, too, in the sense of, in The Groaning Man, I knew I was having to transport teenagers from this world to the fantasy world that I was thinking about. And that was going to, you have to write
fast.
that.
Yeah.
You have to make that happen. And I knew there's going to be this explaining and having to do that. But I knew, man, there better be a sense of danger and foreboding and something's not right here. And that needs to start right at the very beginning. And I think I did that, where in the first page, stuff blows up and starts going crazy.
Yeah. And your characters are really funny too. So.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah. Actually, just an interesting note about that book, The Groaning Man, is that I wrote that really for you and our middle daughter, Jordan, because you were fans of like Harry Potter and all these other young adult fantasy books, and I just started writing a chapter at a time, thinking, what would Joyce and Jordan like to see? What would tickle them, and what would they think was exciting and fun here? And then boom, it was a book. Yeah.
Just one.
Right. So far, just one.
It is a trilogy, just to remind you.
Yeah, but see, I really think Dean Koontz is right. My advice is, I think you need to craft a sentence, a beginning sentence that is provocative or evocative or grabbing or interesting or just kind of weird.
To say, what's going on here?
Right,
I gotta keep
and
going.
you got to get them in. I really think you've got maybe a paragraph. If you can get them in that one sentence, that's so much better.
Yeah.
And I think you notice that with a lot of movies these days. They try not to spend
too much time.
A lot of time setting up. Here's all the background and.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me of the To Kill a Mockingbird that we did, where it was just like
very slow.
Right. Painfully slow.
Right.
So.
Yeah, it's been a long time, but I read Nathaniel Hawthorne's The House of Seven Gables, and in the introduction to that book, I still remember a scene that he laid out in the first few pages of like a Victorian era feast. And yet, even as he's describing this feast in ways that made it seem sumptuous and very rich and decadent, it was creepy. And I I don't know how he did it, you know. So as he's laying out this feast, it's the kind of thing that you read it and you're thinking, well, that sounds like good food, but that ain't right. There's something,
I don't want to eat that.
there's something dark and foreboding
Yeah.
going on. And to me, that was just a really neat thing. Stephen King, I'm going back to Stephen King, but in Salem's Lot, the first scene is a man and a boy, obviously kind of on the run, and it's not really said what they're running from, but
Can't be anything good.
right, right. You find out later it was obviously vampires, and
Yeah.
anyway, I just think that Dean Koontz made that point really, really well. And today, in today's market, wow, if you publish something on Amazon for like the Kindle, for instance, they give 10% they give the first 10% of the book as a free sample, and that's great. But I'm betting you that most people don't download that free sample. But if they give you that, man, you need to make sure that first 10%
It makes them want to read more.
you've got them. You
Yeah.
know. I even wrote that into the description of my. I think I wrote that into the description at Amazon.com of The Groaning Man, that here's my challenge: download the free sample, and if you don't want it, fine. But I mean, here's my bet: you're gonna want to read it. You read that first 10%, and I defy you not to buy the book after that. Of course, everybody's apparently said, okay, I won't buy it.
Well, the other problem with the Kindle books on Amazon is that there's just so much to have to sort through.
Sure, right.
That it gets overwhelming to look at. And
How do you even get
Yeah.
people to read the product page?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Okay, so I wanted to mention that. I think you need to hook readers as soon as possible. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is that Dean Koontz mentioned, in terms of plot, one of the pieces of advice that I thought was really good is that the first thing that needs to happen to your hero is that he needs to encounter some kind of quote-unquote terrible trouble. And that if you don't start your book with the hero being confronted with terrible trouble, your book is in trouble. You know,
So, like, how soon into the book should...
first thing, right away, you introduce your character, and maybe
then there's
while
trouble.
you're introducing your character, he or she stands to lose something extremely valuable to him. I remember Dean Koontz pointed out the book Kramer versus Kramer, which was a movie in the 80s about, and that, it wasn't an action adventure or anything. It was about a couple getting divorced.
Yeah.
And but the terrible trouble came very early on when the guy got served divorce papers, and his terrible trouble, the threat was that he's going to have his child taken away from him, and maybe never get to raise his son like he wants to, and stuff like that. And so it doesn't have to be you've got vampires
Monsters,
coming
yeah.
after you or something like that, but or the end of the world is in sight, and only your hero can save the day. But it does need to be something valuable.
So, this Dean Koontz,
Yeah.
what did he write besides this book?
He actually wrote a lot of novels. One that I thought was really good was Whispers. That's the one I'd recommend people look up, is Whispers. And or just look for his name, Dean Koontz, at Amazon. He's got quite a few books. And
So he also really did write fiction
oh yeah,
as well.
and very successfully too. For some reason, I don't remember a lot of his books being made into movies or anything like that, but the man made a ton of money. He really did know how to write best-selling fiction. And so I think the terrible trouble thing is a really good idea. And then the next step is in plotting that your character takes his or her first step toward trying to address that terrible trouble. And that just makes it worse. And so Dean Koontz is talking about this ladder that just keeps heading down and down and down, and that as the plot progresses, your character's trying to address the problem, but
Just digging a deeper hole
yeah,
instead.
it's just digging a hole.
You'll never get out of that.
Right.
So you got to keep reading.
That's right. Right. And until you get to the stage of final conflict, and now you're in the deepest hole. And he said really the best plot is going to be one where the reader gets to just about the end of the book and thinks that it really is helpless and hopeless and there's no way out. But then you have to have a solution, and the hero is going to find this solution or realize it right at the end, and kaboom, it's the one thing that we were looking for to fix it all and resolve it. The danger there, of course, is that you come up with a solution that nobody could have seen coming. Which, if I had a criticism, if I had a criticism of J.K. Rowling's books, the Harry Potter series, she did a lot of that.
Sometimes,
where she would kind of write her characters into a corner.
Then, ta-da! But it's magic.
Right. And Harry and his friends Harry would come up with something at the end, or something would happen, and
yeah, I think probably the last book was a little bit more riddled with some of those issues than some of the others. Right.
The Goblet of Fire for me was that. But anyway, that's the danger. Right. That's the danger of it. And so I think that's really important, and it really does make for a good story. And the way to think about the plotting, where you see it most, is in like mystery stories, like cop shows or something, where the first scene is that, bam, here's a dead body, and there's some kind of unusual circumstance, and here's the body we found in an alley, but it looks like it fell from the sky or something like that, and what could have made this happen, and then at the end, when it looks like the bad guy's just about to get away, well, the detective has pieced it all together while nobody was watching. And if the solution is really good, it's going to be of the sort where, as the detective is explaining, I've gathered you all in this room so that I can unmask the killer. While he's explaining that, then the reader is going, oh yeah, absolutely, I remember what he's talking. Oh, that's what that meant. And so as he's putting it all together, the reader is thinking, well, of course.
What else could it have
been?
That
makes total sense, know. And so to use that pattern in non-mystery story things where, you do find that final solution, and it's satisfying that way. The only other thing that I wanted to mention, and again, I think it's more true now than when Kuntz wrote about it 30 years ago. His advice was that the reader just wants to get on with it. And so you shouldn't spend a bunch of time describing the sunset and how the ice cream tasted and stuff like that. And the reader just kind of wants to get on with it. And what he mentioned is that action sequences are golden opportunities to secure the reader's attention. That, when the vampire is chasing the hero through the cemetery, that's going to be a hard time for the reader to set the book down and go on to something else.
Unless it gets a little too intense. And then
if they're just scared. Right. And so his point was that beginning writers often make the mistake, because these action sequences are often kind of challenging and hard to write.
Yeah.
They make the mistake of kind of zipping through them and resolving them very quickly. And his advice was, don't be easy on your hero. In the middle of an action sequence, make it hard on your hero. And that's going to make it more enjoyable to read.
And I think it makes you connect with that character a little bit more too, because you're like, oh, come on, you can do this.
Right.
Don't give up. You got to make it out of here. And so you, and that's really what you want your readers to do. You want them to relate to your characters and have them become special people to them, and not just somebody in a book I don't really care about.
And I think that was another piece of Kuntz's advice that I consciously wrote into the books that I've got published now, is that idea that you get into an action sequence and strap in, because you're about to it's about to be a ride,
Yeah.
the thing that I did with the Groaning Man is I don't know if this sounds conceited or what, but I envision the action sequence as if I was watching it in a movie, and I wanted it to be something that nobody had seen before, and so I'm coming up with scenes that are just kind of weird and just different, in an effort to just make it more fun, because hey, this is weird, I've never seen people fight like this or whatever. And those scenes last for a long time, and that's on purpose. Just to keep the reader involved, and that's a lot of fun and all that. So I just wanted to share those tips and the book, Kuntz's How to Write Best-Selling Fiction. I think it's worth it for you to get a hold of it if you're...
Well, it sounds like it's been very influential for you, and really does have a lot of good information in there.
Well, I hope so. I'm sure my implementation of all that stuff has been far less than perfect, but because I have not written best-selling fiction.
Well, that's not been your job. So.
Right.
But I think the things that you have written have been really, really good, You
just say that because you're married to me, though.
No, I say lots of things because I'm married to. Not all of them good. I am honest.
You're right. For sure. All right. Well, folks out there in podcast land, I guess we're about done. I know it's kind of a different sort of thing for us, but this is the Worldview Media podcast and not just the Worldview Movie podcast. And we do want to make sure that on top of being able to discern what worldviews are being preached to us, we really want to train people how to do that and how to be good storytellers and worldview preachers. And so I encourage you storytellers out there, man, get writing, get after it. The only way to get better at your craft is to practice it and keep doing it. All right, so until next time, go out and take dominion in the area of creative arts. It all belongs to the Lord.
That's right.
Let's not be satisfied with letting the devil have all the good stories. All right, see you guys.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Worldview Media Podcast. Please visit reconstructionistradio.com to check out the other podcasts in our network and to download our free audiobooks.